Will democracy survive in the next couple of years?
And essentially, we are the same.
And there are so many needs that Minnesota has.
What people are saying they need right now.
Access to democracy is made possible by donations from the following organizations. Thomson Reuters, a global company with expertise and insight to unravel complex situations in the areas of law, tax, compliance, government, and media. Their worldwide network of journalists and editors keep customers up to speed on relevant global events. Thomson Reuters, the Answer Company. Crutchfield Dermatology, a full-service treatment center in Medi-Spa in Eagan. Their goal is to help you look good and feel great with beautiful skin. With service built around courtesy, dignity, and respect, Mayo-trained Dr. Charles Crutchfield personally treats each patient and is acknowledged as one of the nation's best physicians. Firefly Credit Union, with locations throughout the Twin Cities, has proudly served Minnesotans since 1925. Firefly guides its members forward by delivering customized financial solutions to improve their lives in all aspects of banking. Firefly Credit Union, they light the way with life illuminated. Edina Eye, Physicians and Surgeons, a division of Twin Cities Eye Consultants, has proudly served the Twin Cities for more than 55 years. Now in 7 convenient locations. Using the most advanced technology combined with human touch, Edina Eye offers comprehensive services for dedicated specialists committed to excellence with innovative procedures and expertise for the most advanced eye care.
Welcome to Access to Democracy. I'm Dane Smith, and I'm your guest host, and I'm interviewing today Patrick Coolican. He's the editor at the Minnesota Reformer, which is a interesting, I think, and outstanding new news source for Minnesotans. We are seeing the media change a lot in the last few years, and I think this is one of the freshest, most independent, best sources of news that I've seen in a while. And so, Patrick, welcome. Let's get started maybe with a little biography and tell us where you're coming from, both geographically and philosophically, maybe.
Sure, I'm from the East Coast and went to the University of Notre Dame here in the Midwest. And after that, I was kind of bumming around. I had a liberal arts degree, didn't know what to do. I did not do the traditional journalism track of internships and college paper and that kind of thing. Lived out west, was living in Chicago, and a friend of mine and I, this is in the run up to the 2000 election, presidential election, we decided we wanted to see that election up close. It was kind of the first presidential election of our adulthood, if you will. And it was also, if you remember, open on both sides. There was no incumbent. So we, at the same time, of course, this is the early days of the internet. So we came up with this idea to just start a website and travel around Iowa and New Hampshire following the presidential campaign. So it was kind of my first taste of journalism. And from there, I had some clips, and I went to a newspaper in New Hampshire, and then I went to the Seattle Times. I did a university fellowship where I studied post-traumatic stress disorder. This was at the kind of the height of the Iraq War. I wound up out and did some more traveling. I wound up out in Las Vegas, a little paper called Las Vegas Sun, where I was a political reporter, and just a great news town, fun place to be. I wound up as a columnist there later on. Left and did another university fellowship at the University of Michigan. And then came here to the Star Tribune, where I was in the Capitol Bureau for 5 years, starting in 2014. And in the late 2019, someone approached me and said, we're trying to set up news sites in capitals around the country. And because we think that the loss of local and regional media is bad for democracy. And we hear that, you might be a decent person to know. So the discussions began, and I just felt like it was a great opportunity to build something and to do something new. And I kind of maybe had my fill of conventional media. And so I started in December. A month later, we were up off the ground with 3 reporters and a lot of contributors. And every day we try to produce some piece of enterprise journalism, which means we're trying to produce something that you can't get somewhere else. It's not what happened, it's why it happened or what it means for the future. And then we produce a lot of guest commentaries. Every day we have a guest commentary, try to really provoke discussion and hear voices that we don't hear enough of. We're independent, nonpartisan. I don't think we're shy about our values. On the other hand, we do keep news and opinion separate, but I do think that we're pursuing stories that maybe other people aren't. I think we have maybe a little bit more adversarial bent to us. And I also think that we're interested in issues and in communities that have been overlooked for too long. So that's kind of where we're coming. That's where I'm coming from. As far as philosophically, I was reading Ayn Rand novels in high school. My college was a so-called great books program, so it's like, Western civilization, starting from Homer and continuing on. And I think over time, I've become, I don't know. I mean, I try to be just a radical skeptic. I think is a good trait to have as journalists, and uphold basic values, just like decency and commitment to the truth.
That's impressive. We've traveled a similar road. I was a Ayn Rand devotee in my 20s and was a reporter at the Star Tribune. Eventually, I like to tell people that my mind changed because journalism kept me taking in new information, and I think that is so important in the survival of our democracy, and never been more worried about that than right now. I've been watching The Reformer carefully, of course, in lots of media, and you folks have been all over this this attempt to subvert our democracy. Minnesota Reformer has some. It's part of a network, right? States Newsroom, right? So you can actually draw on a lot of sources in other states, and of course, your experience in Nevada has been interesting and illuminating. Talk a little bit, or brag if you want, about what Minnesota Reformer has been able to achieve in the way of scoops or big stories or analysis that nobody else has, stuff that's been picked up by others. And by the way, I've noticed that you occasionally have you are being mentioned as the original source for some stories and some angles by the Star Tribune and others.
Yeah, that's a little bit of a battle.
No.
I think the biggest media organization in town is loath to admit that when they've been beaten on a story.
I remember it well.
Yeah, but that's okay. Just this past week, we had a story about, we learned of a case of a Republican Minnesota House member had COVID-19, and they didn't tell their colleagues, their DFL colleagues. They did not tell the Speaker of the House. So we broke that story on Monday. We seem to be, it was an odd situation where we're the only ones reporting on this court filing in the Derek Chauvin case. He's the accused killer of George Floyd, where there was a prosecutors that brought to light this situation when he was in 2017. He did something kind of similar to his 14-year-old boy.
Right.
So we have our eye out on court filings like that. Have been in the lead up to the election, we were very focused on disinformation and who is spreading disinformation. So we kind of unearthed this this group, their name escapes me now, but they had seed funding from some very notable, wealthy Minnesotans, people like Stan Hubbard, the owner of a lot of broadcast media. We broke stories about candidates, for instance, Jim Hagedorn, and the questionable spending that was happening in his office, where big contracts were going to his chief of staff's brother and a member of his own staff. It's likely going to lead to some kind of ethics investigation happening probably right now.
Mhm.
We're looking for stories that are, and I guess a week before last, we had a story that was, I think, pretty significant, where one of our reporters was on a conference call that was being held by the chair of the Republican Party, Jennifer Hagedorn, and she talked about how the Republican National Committee had essentially sent them instructions to bang the drum of voter fraud, and let's start. I'm paraphrasing here, but let's cast doubt on the election results. And so we were inside that call. I mean, so it was obviously a big scoop for us. We didn't use any unethical process to do that. We just got an invite, and we did not misrepresent ourselves or anything. They were just foolish enough not to check who was in on the call. And then, of course, that is played out now, where Hagedorn in the last couple of days, or excuse me, Carnahan, it's Hagedorn's wife, but Carnahan has, in the last couple of days, in the last 24 hours, I guess, cast doubt on the Minnesota election results.
Right.
So that's rearing its ugly head now. We're always looking for stories that are we think that other people don't have. I mean, it's not that complicated in a way, although I think that maybe we're having a little bit less deference is good for our organization compared to some of the others. And I don't mean there's good media in this town. I don't want to decry anyone, but I think there was a space for a political and policy shop like ours that is just a little bit more aggressive.
Yes. Well, I think my reading of the Reformer, in my constant looking at your website and your kind of daily blog or your overview of what's going on, I'm struck by how many times you really do take a critical and sometimes skeptical view of both parties, given your generally progressive outlook. Often you will point out what appear to be big mistakes or ethical lapses by Democrats and Republicans. I was struck by today's what do you call it? The
Daily Reformer.
Daily Reformer, the
email newsletter.
The email newsletter, right?
Yeah.
Where you took on Carnahan actually for this latest assault on our system, where she talks about extreme data abnormalities, and then you guys cut to the chase, and you discover that what that really is that Trump did bad in some places where he did good before.
Yeah,
I really do appreciate your the good writing and the sort of cut to the chase attitude of the Reformer. That's just good news judgment, good news sense, and I think you folks do a good job on that. I don't know if folks can see this, but you also have some fun. You had at the end of well, it's really hard to see, I guess. But when I printed out, you always have these dance gifs, and today's is of a naked turkey carcass working.
I have to give credit. So I was off today. So that's Max Nestorak, our deputy editor, but he filled in. He obviously gets the sensibility of the daily newsletter that I write every day.
He's a little out of control. I think you might want to come back in and. No, I think Max has captured your spirit and then some.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So,
I mean, I would say, here's what I would say about that is that there are certain journalistic conventions that are very useful and important.
mhm.
You know, if you're going to write a tough story about somebody, you need to go talk to them and you need to fairly represent what they say.
Right.
But there are times when we use these conventions like, well, let's listen to what Jennifer Carnahan has to say about, and let's somehow give credibility to her when she doesn't deserve any, because this is just loony and it's deserving of mockery.
Mhm.
Now, I don't know, they're not going to do that at the Star Tribune. And that's part of the reason I didn't want to be there for this election cycles, because I couldn't really be, kind of neutral about this election with Trump and then the people who were going to stand behind him.
Go ahead.
I think that fairness is important.
Mhm.
But this is not a situation. I mean, this is an assault on democracy, and it deserves to be nothing but mocked, at least from our standpoint.
I had the same kind of predicament or the same feeling that you just described when I left the Star Tribune more than 13 years ago. It was increasingly hard for me to apply what I felt was a false equivalence to people who, on one side, denied science, and on the other side, accepted what scientists were saying about climate change. Between people who denied the reality of racial inequality or any white responsibility for it, and those who felt otherwise. And it just felt like this he said, she said, as I say, false equivalence was not serving the readers. And of course, I'm an old timer who remembers the old days when the two parties actually both believed in science, and when the two parties actually operated from a more common set of values. And there wasn't a major political party that was drifting towards white nationalism and so forth. But boy, I don't envy how difficult that is these days to walk that line. Do you have any thoughts on where this might be headed as a nation or a state? I'm also curious about, you've been in Minnesota now for a while. I think early on when you were here, I used to jab you a little bit in emails suggesting that you weren't sufficiently reverent about how wonderful Minnesota is. I think you're coming around, actually, but talk about that a little bit. Where's this? Are you as afraid as, or how afraid should we be about the end of democracy, about the things that Trump's doing right now to undermine our faith in our basic election system, and whether we can recover from this?
Wow, big question. I mean, all signs point to bad. His willingness to use instruments of foreign policy and national defense for political gain. His willingness to use, think about something like, I think this is one of the, there's so many of these scandals, but when he pressured the post office to increase postal rates on Amazon because he didn't like what the Washington Post was writing about him. That is straight out of, Erdogan or, one of the sort of modern authoritarians, just nothing we'd ever associate with Anglo-American democracy. And, the firing, the Homeland Security official who was knocking down
to be the best ever, yeah.
Krebs, yeah. he fires him because he doesn't like what he's saying. These are he's created a map for the next authoritarian, and the problem with Trump is he's lazy and incompetent, and he's so impulsive, but he's essentially shown that none of those rules, they don't really mean anything. Mm-hmm. And whether all the times that he's campaigned and broken the rules about campaigning on federal property. I mean, he had his convention speech at the White House, all that. I mean, who's going to enforce that? I mean, it's all just based on a sense of righteousness and decency that if you're willing to just forego it, then there's no, it's entirely cultural, and he's smashed the culture. And so the next authoritarian will be more shrewd, more competent, and it's so easy to kind of, I think we have this idea that like we wake up one day and all of a sudden we're living in tyranny, and that's probably not how it's going to go. It's going to be, you're going to kind of softly float down into this, kind of soft authoritarianism.
Right. Which is the route of Hungary and Poland and
exactly, yeah,
and Brazil. It hasn't been a sudden parallel to the Third Reich. It is more of a transition, a gradual closing down, suing the media until they go out of business, that kind of thing.
Right. Yeah. And then you're not going to get a popular revolt because you're locking up or you're making disappear a handful of political opponents and journalists. But for the vast majority of the country, life just kind of goes on. Right. And the water out of the tap is clean. And
these new authoritarians actually do have the support of substantial numbers of people.
Right.
In some cases majorities, in some cases pluralities.
They often won elections.
Right.
They've all won elections, I should say.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I don't doubt that Putin is actually popular in Russia. Let's get back to Minnesota, though. I'm just wondering if you have any observations about the state. When going into this election, I remember this as a reporter myself. We always tried to hype up the idea that we're a battleground this time and it's going to be a really important state and Republicans could take it this time. And actually, I did not believe that. This time, I could see where Minnesota was almost certain to revert to form. And in fact, I think we were one of the few states that the pollsters had exactly right. The average was 7 percentage points, and I think that's what we came in at. No longer one of the states closest to turning for Trump, and yet there was down ballot disappointment. Failure to take the state Senate, some losses, some seats in the House, just almost identical to the nation. Why do you think that happened? There's a lot of, as a Minnesota Reformer reports today, circular firing squad activity going on about why that is, and I'm curious about your theories.
Well, I don't think we know it yet necessarily until we have the election results. I think there's just a continued geographic sorting that's going on. One thing that I was surprised about when I got here in 2014 was that there were so many rural Democrats.
Right.
It's not something I'm used to.
We're one of the last states to lose, to have rural Democrats.
Right. And I think, this is just about the end.
Yeah.
With Colin Peterson losing
right.
30 years in Congress. There were some more outstate losses and on the House side, John Purcell, and then on the Senate side in Austin, was that Nick? I can't remember who it was, but So that's just a natural evolution that's been happening, where the rural parts of the country have moved away from the Democrats.
And yet, statewide, we're becoming less of a battleground state. I don't recall a period when one party failed to win a statewide race for 14 years, and that's where we are right now.
Yeah, well, where is the growth in Minnesota? It's in the
Right,
cities. To a certain extent, it's in, to a lesser extent, it's in some of the regional centers, but I would say it's all the Twin Cities, Metro, 7 County, and Rochester. And those areas are getting more Democratic.
Right.
And so that makes it impossible. But on the other hand, the Democrats, their voters are not efficiently spread, if you will, because they're all packed into these districts.
Right.
So
I think you guys are onto that better than most in explaining this as not some big philosophical shift or some mysterious thing, but it's just the geographics of democratic representation, and how that disadvantages concentration of voters in districts. I mean, we're seeing this in the United States. Republicans have lost 7 of the last 8 popular votes, and yet they control the Supreme Court 2-1, have controlled the House and the Senate through much of that period. So it really is a kind of thing that's happening everywhere. And that brings, I think, don't you, a lack of faith and confidence in the system from the left, feeling that it's not working there from that vantage point either.
Yeah, it's a threat to the legitimacy of the democratic system. Some of this, at least in Minnesota, will be mitigated by the upcoming redistricting. So there's the census every 10 years, and we'll have new districts, and the new districts should be more equal. In 2010, there was every district had roughly the same number of voters, but or the same number of people. By 2020, you had Frank Hornstein's district in Uptown, had like 35,000 more people than other districts.
That's almost another whole House seat.
Right. That's right.
Right. So yeah, and of course, redistricting is an important consideration in the fact that we have divided control of the legislature. What's always happened in the past, I remember covering this many times, was that it ends up in the courts, and the courts have done a pretty good job of districting Minnesota. Not gerrymandering, kind of doing it the right way. So I'm not too worried about that. I don't know if you have any thoughts on how the districts might look going forward, but
this will be my first redistricting here. Yeah, I mean, it's going to be there's going to be disagreement between the House and the Senate, and that's the big law. That's the big loss for the DFL is not winning the Senate is redistricting, because they could have done to Republicans what Wisconsin Republicans have done to Democrats there, and really carved up the state in a way to their advantage. So yeah, it'll wind up in the courts, and I think from everybody I've talked to, everybody's decently happy with how the courts have drawn districts. I mean, what is definitely going to happen is that rural Minnesota is going to lose seats. Their population, depending on where you're talking about, I mean, some counties have lost population, some have been stagnant. Even those that have grown have certainly not grown as quickly as the Twin Cities. So, on the one hand, I mean, that's good for the DFL, but it's not going to help this urban-rural divide that we have here. It's going to create even a greater sense of, I think, of feeling besieged. I think in greater Minnesota, they feel like they're not getting their fair share. I mean, the data doesn't show that, but there is that sense of resentment, and it's only going to grow when they have when they see representation, when they see themselves losing representation.
Right. White rural umbrage has been kind of the heart and soul of Trumpism. And it's hard to see it changing much, except if he's not there. And gradually diminishes his power and reach. You have to think that would change things. The one thing we know about politics is it will change, and the old certainties change. I can remember years ago when California was a reliably Republican state, and Nevada was too.
Mm-hmm. Right.
It's kind of amazing what's happening. And I remember when the suburbs were considered the Republican stronghold in this state, and how that's changed. Right. We're running close to wrapping things up here. Any quick thoughts on legislative session coming up? It'll be all about COVID and the budget shortfall, I'm sure. Minnesota Reformers here to stay for covering all that.
We are. That is our a main mission of ours, is covering the legislature. This was a very weird year for the legislature. It was supposed to be a relatively short session, and then the pandemic. But we really are focused on this next coming legislative session. It is going to be a stalemate of some, because it's divided legislature, but rarely has a session been more important to this state in the last decade since the Great Recession, I think. If you consider the budget deficit, all the businesses that are suffering, not just from COVID-19, but also the rioting and the arson. Minnesota's in good shape compared to a lot of places, but we've got really a lot of work to do.
Well, I'm so glad you're there, and your team, Max and Ricardo Lopez and the whole crew. I really encourage watchers of Access to Democracy to plug into MinnesotaReformer.com. It is a great news organization, and I think you'll enjoy it. It's fresh, it's irreverent, and pretty close to truthful.
Thanks, Dane.
I think you do a great job. Congratulations on the work you've done so far, and keep it up.
Thanks so much.